A very warm welcome to Steve Gross from Wine Institute. I'll find it.
Hi, everybody. While they find my clicker, it's good to be here. I love doing this conference. It's been fun to be involved from the very beginning with ShipCompliant. I worked with them before they were ShipCompliant. They were 688 Design when they came in and talked to me the first time. But you know, it's at that point I kind of saw them as the smartest kids in the room. And I haven't gotten any older, so they can't have gotten older in the last 10 years either, so they're still the smartest kids in the room. I'm glad to be here. I am, as you said, a little under the weather. Did the last speaker keep the clicker? Okay, I'll just tell them to prompt it. I am that guy that you never want to see when you get on the plane. Last Saturday morning, I was on the 6 a.m. flight from Kansas City to San Francisco in a regional jet for 3 hours and 45 minutes. And the guy who came in and sat down next to me was that guy. He was the one with the cold who coughed and sneezed all over me all the way home. And now I'm that guy. So I apologize to you if you've come up to me and tried to shake my hand and I've gone like that and said I'm not shaking hands today. I'm not trying to be rude, but I have a cold. So in advance, let me just say that if I start to cough and sneeze, please forgive me, but I will try and power through the PowerPoint and get going here. What I want to do today is kind of talk about some of the current trends, what's going on at the state level. As you're probably aware, we don't have 12 states opening in a year like we used to have. There's only a few states because there aren't that many left. But there's still a lot going on in the direct-to-consumer world out there every year at the legislative level. So I want to talk about that, kind of what the trends are, what some of the specific developments are in some of the states. And then I have plenty of time at the end here for some questions, and I'm happy to take questions and answer them as you have them today. This channel has become hugely successful. And I think at the outset, never foresaw exactly how big a piece of business this might be and how important it might be to the wineries. We also never realized how many wineries there were going to be. When I started working on this, there were about 700 wineries in California. So it's changed a lot over time. And when Wines and Vines and ShipCompliant put out their 2014 report, it again talked about this number in billions as $1.5 billion worth of business that was shipped direct by wineries to consumers. And when you start using Bs and talk about billions rather than millions, a lot of people start to pay attention. And I think it's important to put it into context of the importance of the chain when we talk about how that's affected what goes on at the state level. And the people who are not big supporters of direct shipping have also paid attention when you started talking about it with billions instead of millions. The success that you've had and that's been outlined when you start to look at the numbers that have come out in the various reports over the years have led people to have a little more scrutiny over our programs and what's actually going on out there. The state regulators are looking at the reports that are filed by you and are filed by the carriers in order to make sure that in fact they are collecting the requisite revenue that's due to them under the laws in their states. When you're talking about this much wine moving, there's a lot of tax revenue on the table. They want to make sure they're getting their piece of the pie. They also have started looking at the partners that you work with to make sure that all of those people are following the rules and that all of us are doing business in a way that can make everybody remain accountable. Fulfillment houses were one of the first groups that kind of got some scrutiny. You'll recall a number of years ago, Virginia shut down fulfillment houses. We had to go back in and legislate there to fix that. North Dakota did a similar thing. I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, how we were able to work with the state of North Dakota to fix that issue there. But the roles of these third-party people have become important. There are a lot of other kind of third-party providers. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But if they've become more familiar and comfortable with wineries doing direct-to-consumer shipping, they're a little less comfortable still with some of these new relationships that you might have with other people that are doing shipping, and we have to work hard to educate people so that everybody can remain comfortable with this as a legitimate stream of commerce. There are a lot of questions about retailer direct. The retailers have a different map of where they can ship than wineries have. I've got a slide here in a few minutes, I'll show you that, but that's a discussion point that's out there, is what is the future role for retailers? Are they going to be able to go where the wineries go? And then there's some new discussions about, well, gee, this is an awful lot of business. Is this actually more than was originally intended? And some of the discussions of capacity caps, things that we have worked hard to try to avoid and have even litigated in some states, are coming up again. You know, we were involved in a lawsuit in Massachusetts to overturn a capacity cap there and are still working at the state level to try and move on from that, but other states have them. New Jersey has one, Ohio has one, Arizona has one, and those kind of capacity caps limit some wineries from being able to go in and do that kind of business. That's something that we're fighting on a regular basis. So these are just some of the things I think that are the price of success. And it's some of the stuff we've had to talk about at the state level in the past few years. I put this slide together for a presentation last year in January, and actually I've kept using it since then because it really has kind of itemized one of the things that's been a big issue at the legislative and regulatory level, is that while we all think of winery direct shipping, the face of shipping to the state regulators and to the legislators in other states oftentimes looks more like this slide. They see the carriers as the person that they see on their end. They see people like Lot 18 and Sherry Lehman, some retailers that are doing business. They look at the advertisements in the Wall Street Journal and in Southern Living and other kind of publications, and they wonder, how is this happening in my state? Certainly when Amazon came into this market space, there was a lot of question at the regulatory level and at the legislative level of, gee, these guys are retailers and they're selling wine. A lot of education had to take place in order to explain to them that these models are different, that these are third-party providers and what they are and what they're doing, that it's still depending upon the wineries and their licenses in almost every instance. So some of that is legitimate and it's going through the right channels. Some of it isn't, and what we've had to do is kind of try and sort through those things. So what I'd like to do here is kind of at the start talk just a little bit about some of the challenges in this area we've had in the last couple of years. And the opponents of direct-to-consumer shipping, and they're still out there. It used to always be identified as the wholesalers writ large. Well, it's not every wholesaler, but there still are state wholesalers. Primarily wine and spirits wholesalers is in the beginning that were opposed to direct shipping. Now we actually get a lot of opposition from beer wholesalers, even though it's not directly in their space. They're just concerned about anything they see as eroding the traditional three-tier system, which they depend upon to make sure they have leverage over the larger brewers that they do business with. So they're looking at any of these little chinks in the armor to raise questions about any relationship directly between a supplier and a consumer that doesn't involve a wholesaler in the middle tier. We also, though, have other people that are opposed. You know, the in-state retailers in many states remain adamant opponents to direct-to-consumer shipping. A lot of the smaller bricks and mortar retailers have never figured out how to take advantage of it, or they've just simply chosen not to become a part of that part of the business. And therefore, they see every bottle you sell into a state as a potential threat to their ability to sell. And while these arguments we don't think hold up, there's a lot of anecdotal studies and stuff that are out there right now, I think, that show, in fact, what you're doing through your wine clubs and through a lot of your sales are building brands that people then go in and buy through the traditional three-tier channels. There just still is that just knee-jerk fear of, if there's a bottle being sold that I didn't sell, it's gonna hurt me, it can't possibly help me. And I think that's something we're gonna have to continue to try and work with, these arguments that people are making about what role third-party people and others are playing in this, and whether that's undermining the credibility of the winery direct programs. Excuse me. We talk about third-party providers, and just to kind of be clear what we mean in that space, a third-party provider is a non-licensed entity that is working with you in order to facilitate your sale directly to a consumer. This conference, ShipCompliant, is a third-party provider. They are providing you the service of doing the compliance work and helping you with your ability to do direct-to-consumer sales. Other kinds of third-party providers would be, I mentioned before, somebody like Amazon, who's running a portal that is somebody that you are working with in order to make a sale through your winery. It could be something as simple as your POS system. Certainly fulfillment houses fall in this role, people who are doing pick and pack services for you, who are helping you. But it also is anybody who's doing any kind of advertising. Anyone who doesn't hold a license, who's somewhere involved in your relationship with the consumer, would fall under this definition probably of a third-party provider. And it's something that the regulators especially have had a challenge getting their arms around, because sometimes the third-party provider is who the consumer sees, but that's not the person who actually has a license to sell alcohol. And regulators rightly have become accustomed to, in their state, enforcing a system that only people with licenses can sell alcohol. And what we have to do is educate them so they understand that in these situations, you, the winery, hold the license to do the shipment. You are the licensee. These people are simply, it's the same as saying you bought an ad in the San Francisco Chronicle, and that's how the consumer found you, was through your ad in the Chronicle. It's kind of the same thing. You're using a web portal or some other way to have a relationship with them. But the fact that it's new technology, it's different, has presented challenges, and there's had to be a lot of education. Part of the reason we've had to do that kind of education is not every third-party provider is doing it right. If everybody had followed all the rules and there was never any gray lines or never any red lines being crossed, I don't think the regulators would have had the questions and the concerns they've had. But there are a few unscrupulous folks out there who have taken advantage of the fact that they don't have licenses and don't have anything at risk, and have misled some wineries into perhaps getting involved in some shipping schemes or something that weren't legitimate. I think the vast majority of the third-party providers are doing everything they can to work within the rules and to follow the rules. But there's some tests that you have to follow and be aware of as you're doing your commerce to make sure that, in fact, you are in compliance, because you are the one with the license, and anybody that you're partnering with who breaks the rules, typically every state is going to come back to you as the licensee to do the penalty and the enforcement if there is, in fact, a law that's being broken. One of the major tests you have to think about is nobody can hold a license for you to ship into another state. So if somebody comes to you and says, oh, we hold the shipping licenses that are necessary, you don't have to have your licenses, question that. The only way that you could work with somebody else who's doing a shipment into a state is if they hold a retail license and you're actually selling it to them, or you're selling the wine at wholesale and it's moving through the traditional three-tier system into another state. No shipping company, no warehouse, or anyone else can hold a license to ship on your behalf. You can't ship under their license. So people are often going to show you models or talk to you and say, oh, it's fine, it's fine. You can say, that guy from the Wine Institute, he told me that that's a problem. Have them come talk to me. If they can show me a model that is perfect, I'm the first one who's going to say more power to them, and I'll come back and tell you that they were right. They have something that's working. But nobody's ever really taken that offer and come to me with one of those programs, which tells me, I think, that what you need to do is watch out for the unscrupulous people. It's the people who say they can do it for you and you don't need a license. That's really when you need to pay attention, because it's your winery's license that's on the line, both the federal license and your state license. So make sure you're following the rules. If you follow the rules, this is what the world looks like now. There are 41 states you can ship to. There are a couple states that are in play. The states that have kind of the hash marks in there, I'll talk about a little more in a few minutes. There's not much red out there, and that's good news. Over 90% of the US population lives in a state that if you have the correct licensure, you can ship to them. And we hope by the end of the year to be up knocking on 95%. I mentioned before that retailers have a different world, and this is just for those people in the room who are retailers. And if you're a 1720 combination here in California, other states look at you as a retailer. So you have to remember, you have to follow this map and not the map for the wineries. The 1720 is a combination wholesale license and a non-premise retail license that some people use for internet sales. So If you are that kind of a licensee, just be aware there's a different set of rules that apply to you. One of the slides that I wanted to also put up is, people often wonder, well, how could I get in trouble? How does anybody know what's going on? More and more states are requiring the common carriers to hold licenses to participate in direct-to-consumer shipping. This is a list of the states that currently require licensure for direct shippers, or for the common carriers, excuse me. And even more states also require some kind of reporting from the carriers. So there is a whole lot more rigor. I talked before about the scrutiny of the reports, comparing the common carrier reports to your winery reports to make sure that people are in fact paying the requisite taxes for what they're shipping into the states. And there's also auditing taking place. A lot of people are saying, well, who's going to check? Well, hopefully you weren't one of the wineries that got a visit from the Texas auditors that spent a good deal of time here in the Napa Valley and some over in Sonoma over the course of the last year, going from winery to winery doing audits of their direct-to-consumer shipping programs. Other states have done it too. So just be aware that, as I said at the outset, there's a whole lot of money on the table right now, so people are putting forth the effort to collect the revenues that they feel they're due. So the legislative update for 2014, I'm going to go back just a second and start with 2013, because there were a few things that happened after the conference last year that I want to bring you up to speed on. Excuse me. 2 new states opened up, and that's always the good news, is when a state that formerly wasn't open at all opens, that's where we get the most excited. One of these was a little more exciting than the other one. Arkansas is what we would consider to be a flawed law. I'll give you the real quick story. You all behaved. The Speaker of the House in Arkansas and his wife came to the Napa Valley, and not one of you would sell him any wine. I'm so proud of you. That doesn't always happen. However, the Speaker is really powerful in Arkansas, so he went home, and without having a hearing, without doing anything else, he made his wife happy because she says, I want to buy wine next time we go. And in 3 days, he put a bill through in Arkansas without a public hearing that it only allows for on-site sales. So we always try to get bills that allow for both on-site and off-site sales. But for the Arkansas bill that was just passed, it's a $25 permit. The Arkansas consumer has to be visiting at the winery when they place the order. And this is a wacky provision. It's 1 case per calendar quarter. So this is why you have ShipCompliant, because they can track that. There is the state excise tax at a 6.5% sales tax is what's to be collected. We've just learned that there is perhaps going to be a bit of a change in that. Some of the state tax folks are saying that the local sales tax has to be collected, not a local alcohol tax. We're trying to get to the bottom of that. We're fighting it at the moment. But keep an eye on the ShipCompliant blog. If in fact they do decide that they're going to go and start collecting some of the local taxes, obviously the ShipCompliant tool will be changed to account for that. But for the moment, our information remains that it was the excise tax and just the 6.5 state tax. The other thing that was really funky in Arkansas was they said you had to have a sticker provided by the Arkansas ABC that they were going to sell you for $10 that you would put on the box that said it had to go to an adult consumer. Well, after we screamed and hollered quite a bit on that one, they did finally come around and say that the existing FedEx and UPS shipping stickers would meet the requirements of the statute and that they would approve both of those for shipping. The other good news is both FedEx and UPS have announced that they are now going into the Arkansas market for these on-site shipments. So our job now is to come back in and fix this one and make it a little better in the future. But for the moment, for any of those people from Arkansas that come to your door, and if the Speaker of the House and his wife come back, thank them, sell them some wine, and tell them to make it better when they go home. But so anyway, there was a bit of progress there. Montana also opened up in 2013, and this was a little bigger change. This one, they used to have what they called the connoisseur's license in Montana, which was problematic because the carriers weren't able to accommodate that one because they only will ship from a licensee. So now that the connoisseur's license is gone, the new Montana permit is, if you're in the three-tier system already, all you need to do is get a $50 endorsement to be able to sell. It's an endorsement to your existing certificate of authority. If you don't, if you're not already in the system, you can sign up and register as a shipper. It's still $50. What you then do, it's 18 cases per consumer per year, and it's just an excise tax. There's no sales tax in Montana. So it's an easy one. There is brand registration, but it's per brand, it's not per label, and it's free, I believe. Yeah, it's no fee. So it's pretty easy to navigate. This was one of the new ones, this one we've been working on for quite a while, because there had been a lot of frustration because it was kind of gray. The consumer thought they could ship because of the connoisseur permit, but it just wasn't working, so we were able to replace it. And that was good progress. Nebraska had a bit of a negative change. This is a state where the Amazon issue was a big deal. There was a threat to come in and shut down any use of any kind of web marketing third-party folks in Nebraska. Good education took place. The very aggressive attorney from Amazon, who's sitting right over there, hi Kristen, did a good job of educating the ABC that in fact Amazon was not the one doing the shipments, that in fact it was the wineries that were doing the shipments. That went a long way to assuage the chairman of the ABC, whose mother is a big foe of Amazon, because she has the biggest, it's Nebraska Furniture Mart, which is where everybody buys their online TVs and everything in Nebraska. So there were personal politics involved there, but what we were able to do was to maintain the shipping law in Nebraska, but they did make a couple changes. One was they made it clear that state taxes are applied. We've always said that state sales taxes were to be collected. It's now explicit that they are to be collected. It also requires you to notify your wholesaler if you intend to do direct-to-consumer shipping into the state. That's blackmail, I think, but nonetheless, it just you have to acknowledge to them that you've sent a letter to your wholesaler notifying them that you're going to ship when you renew your license. All of these provisions are going to be subject to a review. And one of the other changes that was to have been in here was they were going to go from annual to monthly reporting and tax payments. That's what the statute says. I believe it's still the case that they have not made that change. Annie, is that correct? That is correct. Okay. I act like I know stuff, but Annie Bones, stand up and wave, Annie. Annie's the one who really knows things. I'm kind of like a puppet sometimes. She's the one who you get when you have a question and talk to Annie all the time. But although the statute now says you're supposed to pay monthly, they haven't come up with a form to allow that or anything, so it's still annual tax payments in Nebraska. North Dakota and state did make a change. We went in and worked with Ann last year to try and resolve the issue of the fulfillment houses. And we were very successful in doing that. They came up with a program that now has what they call a logistics shipper, which we call a fulfillment house, gets a license. And if you're working with a fulfillment house, when you file, you designate which of the fulfillment houses you'll be using. And that then all of the reporting is done, and they're able to track what's coming directly from the winery or what's coming from the fulfillment house. It's been a lot of progress. As I believe most everybody's aware, FedEx announced last fall that they stopped shipping into North Dakota. They were unable to do all of the required compliance at the time with the new reporting requirements, and we're hopeful that that is going to be worked out in the future. But for the moment, they are not shipping into North Dakota. So, what's on the horizon for 2014? There's some good stuff happening, and we think it could be very big stuff. Two big states, Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, are both in play, and those are the ones that are going to get us up, knocking on that 95% number. I think that's important. And then we start with Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a control state for alcohol. If you've been back there and been to one of the state stores, all wine and spirits are sold through state stores. For the longest time, Pennsylvania was just not open to this idea. And then all of a sudden, people started talking about completely privatizing the Pennsylvania liquor control system. And the people at the PLCB decided they were a little more interested in becoming consumer friendly and getting creative and modernizing their system. And one of the things they came out in support of, rather than get rid of the whole system, was to modernize it, doing things like creating a direct-to-consumer shipping law. So there are a number of freestanding bills out there. One has already passed the House and is over on the Senate side that deals specifically with direct-to-consumer shipping. And we're confident that one of those bills is going to pass in 2014. It really looks like that's likely to happen. What was holding everything for the moment is the much broader discussion about whether or not Pennsylvania is going to modernize or privatize. All of those discussions are taking place right now in the Pennsylvania Senate, and over the next 2.5 weeks, they may or may not do something to change the entire distribution system in Pennsylvania. Included in all of those big packages is direct-to-consumer shipping. So if they were to do one of the big modernization changes, we would be included in that. That's looking a little less likely right now that one of those will pass. But even if we don't make it through that one, we then still have the standalone bills that are waiting to go. So I do think that Pennsylvania is really poised to open up for some shipping this year. Everybody back there wants to make some changes to the law so they can say that it's been modernized. So there's a good incentive for people who used to be our opponents to now be our proponents and help us get something passed. And so this will be a good market. The big thing we're fighting about now is how much the tax rate's going to be. Originally, they wanted it to be 24%, which is the 18% Johnstown Flood Tax. That was in the 1930s, I think. But we're still paying for the Golden Gate Bridge, guys, every time you go across. So the Johnstown Flood Tax is 18%, and then it's a 6% sales tax. So what we're trying to do is negotiate those numbers down. We're now closer to something like the 12 to 18% range is, I think, where we're likely to land, which is close to what we have. I mean, New Hampshire and Wyoming, these are states that don't have a gallonage tax. So there's one fee that would be the amount that's going in. So we're looking somewhere in that number, and that's pretty close. It's 10% in New Hampshire, so we're getting close. We're not quite there yet, but we're still working on it. Now, the other state that I really want to get done is Massachusetts. This is a cartoon that ran in one of the papers back there this year, and it's Drew Bledsoe, who's a former quarterback for the New England Patriots, throwing his wine into a crash stack, and he says, for those of you who don't have glasses, this delivery method isn't working. Well, Drew has a winery in Walla Walla called Doubleback Cellars, and actually, never thought I'd do this. The Wine Institute registered Drew Bledsoe as a contract lobbyist to go in and talk to the legislators in Massachusetts last year about direct-to-consumer shipping, and he was a perfect spokesperson. He understands it. He has a compelling story to tell. He told about trying to ship wine to Tom Brady, the current Patriots quarterback, and he couldn't ship it to Massachusetts, so he had to ship it to Tom's dad in Sacramento, and by the time Tom got out here to drink the wine, his dad had already drank it all. So, I mean, it was a very good story, and it was a great person. He's articulate, he was camera ready, and able to do a lot of good work for us. The best news right now is that the language that we had in a standalone bill has been incorporated into the House version of the budget. And in my world as a lobbyist, if you can get your issue stuck into the budget where it's a part of a whole big messy deal, that's the best way to get something passed, because they have to pass a budget every year. So I'm in the House budget, now I'm trying to get into the Senate budget, and if I can do that, then we can get our bill out. Now, we still have a freestanding bill that's been tied up in committee for a while, but we're very encouraged about the opportunity to move something through the budget process. This is the first time we've ever been able to get something in the budget in the state of Massachusetts. So this is good progress, it's exciting, and we'll know in the next 5-6 weeks. Yeah. Well, the carriers won't ship because there currently isn't really a legal business path for them. There's a separate bill that's standing there that would give a fleet license to the carriers. So there are also parts of this bill. The current law in Massachusetts says that the box has to have a Massachusetts-specific label on it, and it doesn't approve the current carrier labels. The language in the budget fixes that, and it allows the carrier language to go. It doesn't fix the fleet license, that's a separate bill, but it's all going in the right direction. So, cross your fingers, and I'm going to talk about this again at the end of this thing. If you get a request from Free the Grapes to reach out to your consumers in Massachusetts to have them do something, or in Pennsylvania over the course of the next month, please respond and forward those emails to your consumers in those states that might be waiting to do the business. That is our best tool right now to be able to get people engaged. So, Optimism for Massachusetts and Pennsylvania. I haven't said that for a while, but I really think it might happen. New Jersey, we had hoped to fix the capacity cap issue. I mentioned that before, the 250,000 gallon limit on wineries that can ship in. We'd hoped to fix that a couple of, in 2013, but it was an election year. And during an election year in New Jersey, things get kind of partisan and just a little bit nasty. So we decided we'd wait till 2014, when everything had settled down and everybody in New Jersey was going to love one another again and it was going to be fine. And then there was that bridge thing. They don't love each other in New Jersey yet. So we have waited to introduce the Fix-It bill until we can get a little more consensus where we know, because we're going to need votes both from Republicans and Democrats to get this passed. And so there's a Fix-It bill in the pipeline that would deal with both the capacity cap issue and the issue that would require corporate tax payments for LLCs and not partnerships, but corporations that file in the state of New Jersey. So we are working on a bill to fix both of those things. It's going to be introduced probably in the next couple of months. They are on a different calendar than the rest of the states. Virginia and New Jersey are the two states that have a 2-year session that started this year instead of on the even years. So this one could take a little while, like maybe 18 months at the outside, but we are working on that one in New Jersey. And then there were a bunch of the rest of the states where we had bills this year. I just want to touch on a few of them. Delaware is still got legislation pending. I know this is a huge state. It's going to rock your world if we pass it, but we're still trying. Good news in Delaware is we were able to get a bill out of committee for the first time. The ABC director, who had always opposed direct-to-consumer shipping, actually came out in favor of the bill this year with some amendments. And so we are cautiously optimistic we can make some progress there. It may take another session before we're done. Our big play this year, the state we really were focused on and wanted to get was South Dakota. A lot of you were very helpful and responded to the Free the Grapes requests and stuff in South Dakota. We got a bill through the Senate. We got it over into the House, and we got killed in a House committee. And it was one of the nastiest fights we'd had in a long time. The wholesalers and the retailers in South Dakota came out with all kinds of kind of spurious arguments. They weren't even truthful arguments about what the pricing schemes were, how direct-to-consumer shipping works. They were talking about how many retailers had gone out of business in all the other states, and the retail industry is hardly hanging on in all the other states that have direct-to-consumer shipping. Only South Dakota is thriving. It was tough, and it was very frustrating. We hired a former Speaker of the House to be our lobbyist, and now he's mad because he feels that he got maligned, so we're going to retain him again and see if he can come back in and help us. But South Dakota was a disappointment because we thought we had a good chance to get that one this year. Sally Jefferson, who handles that for Wine Institute, did a really good job, and we thought we were there. A couple other things just to kind of tell you what we're working on, even though these haven't passed. In Indiana, there was a bill to try and remove the on-site provision in the Indiana law, as well as to address the requirement in Indiana that if you have a wholesaler, you can't get a direct-to-consumer shipper's license. So we tried to get those amended on to an unrelated alcohol issue bill. It got on the Senate side. We didn't get it out on the House side, but we're going to come back and continue to work on that in Indiana. But that's a state that some people have been very frustrated because either they have a wholesaler so they can't do business there, or they just haven't been able to get in and do the business because of the on-site visit requirement, where people are required to have come to your winery at least one time in order to have ever get any subsequent shipments from them. In Oklahoma, it's hard to get anything done simply because all of their alcohol beverage law is in the Constitution, so everybody has to vote on it. And that's a very expensive proposition. If you can't get the legislature to place it on the ballot, then you have to go through signature collection and all that kind of stuff, and it's very hard. So we do have an effort, and it's gone forward, and we're going to work on it again next year to have the legislature place on the ballot a referendum where the voters will actually say whether or not they want direct-to-consumer shipping. There's a bunch of other alcohol issues that are percolating around there, dealing with whether or not the grocery stores can sell wine and high-proof beer and things like that, and that's all kind of confused the issue for a little while, but we're going to continue to watch for that and look for an opportunity to get Oklahoma fixed. And then the Deep South. There were bills introduced in both Alabama and Mississippi. I wouldn't hold your breath on either one of those quite yet. I don't believe they're ready for direct-to-consumer shipping, but we do have the bills down there, and we have continued to try to work the legislatures there in order to get them to look at this and to open up. Okay. Let me talk about that. I've got a slide that touches on at the very end. Let me talk about that. She was asking about the ABC store shipment thing in Alabama, and I'll touch on that in a few minutes. So, what are the things that we're still working on at the state level on direct-to-consumer shipping? We're going to continue to try and open up those last red states. We're optimistic that sooner or later we're going to get there. Jeff at various conferences has tried to retire me by saying when I get certain things done, I have to retire. I can't afford to retire yet, but I've been at this now for almost 28 years, and I am not necessarily going to wait for Utah, though, before I do retire. But for a little while, I think I have a little job security yet because I'm not going to have them all done. But we're going to keep working to try and open up all the rest of the states. But a big part of what we're trying to do also is improve the existing states, because we recognize that there are states that have components in their laws. Some of them are old components, and some of them are just kind of draconian things that we knew were bad when they were passed, but it's all we could get, that we need to change. Those are things like the capacity caps, in Arizona or Ohio, in New Jersey, where certain size wineries can't participate in the state. Onerous paperwork requirements. I mean, having to do big applications. Do you really need to fingerprint your boss every time? We'd like to think that's not really a requirement that you should have to do. So what we're trying to do is simplify and streamline that. The things that they announced this morning, the ShipCompliant tools, the direct filing thing, I think those kind of things are huge in getting rid of just some of these reams of paper that everybody's had to deal with for so long. But, one of the things that can help is simply going from a monthly filing schedule to an annual filing schedule. And if we can't get annual, even semi-annual, those kind of changes, they reduce the paperwork. The states are no longer processing a lot of 39-cent checks. They're processing checks that cover a little longer period, so it's going to make sense for everybody. So we keep going back in and we keep trying to streamline those procedures. One of the things that we're finding is some of the ancillary filings are getting as hard or harder than the ABC filings. Dealing with the Secretary of States in some of the states has become quite complex. What is it you need to really have to be a direct-to-consumer shipper? Do you have to be registered as a doing business in the state with the Secretary of State? So some of those rules need clarity. We're working hard to do that. That's something Annie spends a lot of time working with my regional staff on, trying to find out those kind of answers. We're trying to remove bonding requirements. You may have noticed a lot of states like Texas and Iowa and things used to require a bond every year. Now if you can show you had a certain period of tax-paid performance, where you hadn't been overdue on a tax payment, for example, for 3 years, then they no longer are going to require you to post a bond. So just any kind of relief like that we can get, we're going back in and trying to tweak the statutes. And another big thing we do is we work with the carriers. Both FedEx and UPS, they're the linchpin to be able to make sure these programs work. So I'm in contact with their legal folks, with their sales teams. Annie works a lot with their folks. My regional people work with them to try and make sure that the states maintain a good level of comfort with the carriers, and that all of us can work together to make sure that this stream of commerce can continue, because we can't sell $1.5 billion worth of wine from wineries into other states if the carriers aren't able to carry it. So that's something we continue to work on. And this is the world the way it looks right now. So lots of progress has been made. When we started this in 1985, when I was, as I said at a panel yesterday morning, tall and skinny and had dark hair. The only lie in that was I was never skinny. But, there were no states you could ship to legally. And now, as I said before, there's 90% of the population lives somewhere that you can get to. It just takes a lot of hoops to jump through, and we're trying to reduce the number of hoops. A couple of final reminders. There's a couple of states that are outliers on this. There's still a few places that have the federal on-site rule. Delaware, one of the states we're trying to get a permit, until that happens, there is still the on-site rule that if they visit at your winery, they can ship an unlimited amount back. You can ship it for them. They're required to pay the taxes that are due when they get back to Delaware. Oklahoma allows you to ship up to 1 liter per visit. In South Dakota, up to 1 gallon, which tells you it's kind of an old law, because I know most of you don't have those gallon jugs sitting around in the winery anymore. But keep documentation whenever you do these on-site, because all 3 of these states at various times have looked to do some auditing. So keep some kind of an original signature or a tear pad or something that shows the person was at your winery when they made the purchase, so it's not just the same old credit card receipt that says signature on file like you have for everything else when it's a remote sale. And this is your test slide. If somebody tries to show you a system that'll allow you to do a direct-to-consumer shipment to somebody's home in any of these states, then tell them to come see me, because I don't quite know how they could be doing that, other than moving it perhaps through a retailer in that state. Alabama, the exception to the Alabama rules, what was mentioned just a few minutes ago, the Alabama ABC will issue a permit to a consumer to allow you to direct ship wine to them to an Alabama ABC store for the consumer to go pick up. You cannot ship it to their home, you can ship it to the store. And so we don't consider that a direct-to-consumer shipment because it's not going to a home, it's going to a licensed entity. And so the carriers will take those because it's a licensee-to-licensee shipment. But you have to have that permit, and it has to go to one of the state stores. So they can't tell you it's going to Bubba's Barbershop. It has to go to a state ABC store. In Kentucky, in theory, there's a bill that would work in Kentucky, except none of the carriers are going there. It's only for wineries under 5,000 gallons, and it's only a couple of cases, so nobody really could take much advantage of it anyway. But because of some past litigation, neither carrier is shipping there, so we still mark that as closed. Massachusetts, I told you we're working on that law, trying to get it fixed. There is the carrier issue in Massachusetts. The only deliveries currently being done in Massachusetts that we're aware of legally are FedEx home deliveries for Massachusetts retailer deliveries within the state of Massachusetts. Nothing crossing state lines into the state of Massachusetts. Mississippi, there shouldn't be any way somebody's shipping directly to their home. If they tell you they have a way to do it, question it. Pennsylvania, there are a very few wineries that have become licensed as a Pennsylvania farm winery. You can do it, it's very expensive, and it's very time-consuming on the reporting end. Wait, hopefully we'll have that law passed for you by the end of the year, and then that'll be a great market, I think, for everybody to use. And last, my poster child, Utah. You shouldn't be shipping into Utah. That's all I'm going to say there. But what can you be doing right now to help us and help yourself to get these markets? Ensure that you're only making legal shipments. There are still people who say, well, the guy down the street does it. Well, he might be willing to lose his license, but you shouldn't be willing to lose yours. And everybody who breaks the law makes it harder for us to pass good laws. So everything you do should be legal. We also urge you to use age verification services whenever you're doing a sale on your end of the transaction. Some states require it. It's a part of their statute, states like Michigan and Kansas. But you should do it every time. It's a best practice that you should do. The Federal Trade Commission says you should do it, which if nothing else should be a good reason to do so. It costs a little bit. If you're a ShipCompliant customer, it's in your program. But if you're not, you should be doing it. Work with compliance companies. Make sure that they're doing the right thing. Not everybody is following all the rules. If you feel that anybody you're working with is fudging on something, call them on it. And say, it's in everybody's best interest to have this work. It's when the rules get broken and people are able to point to problems that we have a problem being able to keep the laws open and keep the states open. And the third-party provider thing, I think we talked about that. I don't need to hit it again. But the last one I really do urge you is, if you're not already signed up on the freethegrapes.org site as a winery to get the winery updates as far as what you can do as an advocate to open up new states, please go there and just sign up. We use their Facebook page so effectively to communicate with consumers in the various states, to get them to do outreach to their legislators. There are also opportunities where they will give you text that you could insert into an email that you send to your potential customers in a state or in an existing state where we could have a law being challenged. When they tried to take away the ability to use Amazon to ship into Maryland last year, we utilized the Facebook page from Free the Grapes and generated great material going to the legislators in those states. When the consumer goes to that site, they enter their address, and it crafts a letter directly to their assembly person, their state senator, and then whoever else in that state we've targeted for them to do an outreach to. So it's a hugely effective tool. So when you get those requests from Free the Grapes, please respond. It's the best thing you can do to help yourself to build your business. And lastly, I would just say, I get a lot of credit for the good things that happen. I get the blame when something crappy happens too, but we have more good things than bad things I think that happen, but I don't do it by myself. I have a great team of people that work across this country working on this. I introduced Annie a few minutes ago, who works with me in the San Francisco office, but across the country, I've got 6 regional offices. These are full-time employees of the Wine Institute who supervise contract lobbyists in the state to do this work on behalf of the wineries. This last year, we had 48 contract lobbyists who worked in 43 states. And I'll end today by thanking those wineries in the room that are members of the Wine Institute, because you're the ones that allow us to be able to do this work that's allowed everybody to sell $1.5 billion worth of wine direct. If you're not a member, Kara from the Wine Institute, I think, is wandering around here somewhere too. She's our member relations person. I urge you to talk to her, because we're stronger when everybody participates. And that is the end of what I had. I'm happy to take some questions. I think we have a little time, Jeff. Yeah. Yes.
There are places here in Napa Valley that claim they ship state. I'm curious, what about individuals?
Okay. The question is, there are places in Napa that say we'll ship anywhere, and it's individual to individual. No state has a law that allows a private individual to ship wine across state lines. The only legal way to move wine across state lines is for a licensee to do so via one of the legal programs that we've talked about, one of the permits. So there are people who are doing those shipments. They're illegal shipments. As a winery person, what's important for you to know is that you're responsible for any shipment you are facilitating. So, if you're holding the wine at your winery for somebody to come pick up to do an illegal shipment, then you would be a part of that, I think, if a state came after you, because you had facilitated that illegal shipment by participating in it, recommending the carrier, whatever it's going to be. Where you are off the hook is if the consumer walks out the door with the wine. If they take it with them and go do something illegal with it, it's not your fault. But I wouldn't be recommending where they go or how they do that. If nothing else, none of that wine can be insured. If they ship it illegally and it goes awry, it's going to get broken or whatever, they can't get their money back. Everybody's going to be unhappy. If you recommended it, you're in a mess. But the last thing I would say is we don't want that business, because what that does is it puts the carriers, who are our partners, in a position of having unknowingly broken the law. They can lose their shipping privileges into a state because of people doing those kind of shipments. And why would you as a winery want to risk either FedEx or UPS or any other carrier losing their license to ship into a state where you want to do business in order to accommodate a consumer who wants to break the law to ship something home? You can get it to almost every state following your rules if you get the right licenses. That's the way it needs to move. Another question.
I'm gonna
sorry.
jump in here for just a second. So we have actually plenty of time for questions for Steve, but 3 quick announcements. Number 1, when we're asking questions, please try to wait for the mic. We got Jessamine here from our research team, and we got Hannah over here from our client services team, just so we have the audio and that kind of thing. 2 quick announcements, and we'll get to more questions. Don't forget to fill out the blue survey forms, which are on your chairs. And then following the breakout sessions, please come back. We're going to have a great closing session. We're going to be giving out some prizes. One of the prizes is a pair of Beats headphones, apparently. So we got some nice things to give away in the closing session. Come on back. We're going to end the day on a high note. Okay, please wait for the mic. Jess and Hannah are going to hustle.
I am a wine importer, and my question is, does the Wine Institute actively advocate for opening up more states for imported wines?
We have, our model legislation, when we introduce it, always has included retailers and importers and everyone. The vast majority of the importers in the country are wholesalers, and they have opposed having wholesalers included because of the joint licensure, basically, that they don't want an out-of-state wholesaler being able to ship into the state, so that's the reason that those bills have not passed. So it's less of us advocating for it than who's advocated against it, and it's been the wholesale tier has been the major opponent. That's why it's important, though, that retailers be included wherever they can be, because retailers are your avenue to work through to do direct consumer shipping is with a partner retailer. It's still a smaller pool of states at this juncture. Right here. And then back there.
Steve, can you tell us about the status of the federal law that was going to affect the direct shipping?
Oh, the CARE Act. It's gone. It's dead and gone. It died last year, and they did not reintroduce it this year. The reference was to the CARE Act, which was sponsored primarily by the beer wholesalers with the tacit support of the wine and spirits wholesalers, and it would have undermined the good direct shipping laws that we had passed. And basically what it was doing was it was taking the Commerce Clause out of play, I guess would be the way I would describe it, that the courts couldn't interpret anything where the 21st Amendment wouldn't have had supremacy over the Commerce Clause. And the key to the Granholm decision, which is what was a big part of us opening up the states, was the Commerce Clause prevailed over the 21st Amendment. So that bill has gone away. It hasn't been reintroduced again. I just think there's been a lot of other stuff on their plate, and they weren't successful in getting it. They never got a Senate sponsor, so I don't think that play is still there. That doesn't mean that the beer wholesalers aren't still concerned about anything that is, in their mind, undermining the 3-tier system. I just think that's not the play to fix it anymore. There's a question in the back.
Hi, can you talk to reciprocity? I've seen some wineries list that they only ship to reciprocal states.
Yeah. Reciprocity was great, and it's how we started shipping back in the original bills that were passed in the 80s were what we called reciprocal shipping bills, and there were 13 states that passed those up until 2001 when the last one was passed. The problem with them was they were basically unconstitutional, just like the other things. And we knew that going into the Granholm case, that the reciprocal states were likely to be found to be unconstitutional. So after the Granholm decision in 2005, which was the Supreme Court decision that said a state can't discriminate in favor of in-state wineries against out-of-state wineries, we had to go back into all of the reciprocal states and transition those laws over to permit states. So technically there are no more reciprocity states. All of the states that used to be reciprocity states are now permit states, so they're all blue on our map now. We used to have yellow and blue states, and my maps have gotten a bit simpler, but the great thing about reciprocity is there were no permits, there was no taxes, and there was no reporting. It was kind of the Wild West, and everybody loved it, but it was also unconstitutional. What do you do? There was a question right back here, too.
Steve, just to complicate things a little bit further, though, the reciprocity does exist for retailers
It
in a
does.
certain number of states. So like New Mexico a couple years ago passed a law for wineries that enacted a permit system, but the reciprocal language in the statute remains for retailers. And I think there's 2 other states.
California, New Mexico,
Like
and
Idaho?
no,
maybe?
Idaho didn't include it. I think it's
Missouri.
Missouri. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Your slide on, I think it was Arkansas,
Uh-huh.
you said that you could ship once a quarter.
Once per calendar quarter. So that's defined as January through March or April through, you divide the normal quarters.
The obvious question is, when they're on site, can you write 4 orders? While they're here,
Nope.
hold the orders.
The only state that allows you to oversell, and there's always an exception, which is why everything gets hard. Arizona allows you, under the on-site provision, Arizona, if you're over 20,000 cases, you can only ship into the state if you have a permit. There's an exception that if the consumer is visiting on-site at your winery, you can sell to Arizona. And it's, how many cases? I don't remember. A couple of cases a year, I think. You're allowed in Arizona to collect the money while they're there and have that shipped through the course of the year. So in theory, if you have a wine club that has 4 6-bottle shipments, if they paid for it all when they were visiting you in January, you could have them be a member of the wine club. They have to come back the next January, though, and place a new order. It's not a standing thing. So, we always say the on-site states, you cannot include them in a wine club. Arizona is the only one that would be different, where they can prepay for an order that's going to be shipped. The theory behind on-site, it's what they could be schlepping back with them on the plane, but you're allowed to, for convenience sake, ship it for them. And that schlepping theory doesn't work for September and November if you're trying to do this, if they're paying for it in February. Again, with the one exception of Arizona. Over here.
Regarding Arizona, is that calendar year or 12 months?
Calendar year.
Thanks.
Have I, oh.
I noticed on the map that Louisiana was a state that we can ship to. Is that?
It's complicated.
Okay.
Louisiana, you can, if you have a wholesaler in Louisiana, you cannot ship into Louisiana, except under a reinterpretation of their statute, you can now get a license and ship products that you do not have listed in the state of Louisiana. So, my fictional winery, Gross Chateau, I'm never going to have that, just so you know. If I only am selling my Cabernet through a wholesaler, I could get the direct shipper's license and ship my Gross Chardonnay. See, it's not going to work. But that's the exception with Louisiana. But if you have a wholesaler, most people have not been in there because of that. Okay, a couple more back there, and then we'll wind it up. I don't want to exhaust you all.
So I'm sure everyone in the room is doing everything completely above board, so this is simply an academic question.
What a great room, then.
You talked about audits, Texas.
Yeah.
Do you have any sense of how common these audits are from state to state?
More and more common, I guess, would be my answer. Actually coming into the wineries and doing the audits, there's not a lot that have done it. Florida's done it, Texas has done it, I think Maine has done it. The rigor with which they are comparing the carrier reports to your reports and sending you little love notes is increasing. So, I think the odds of being caught in an error, which is how we'll phrase it, are considerably higher now than they were even 5 years ago, I think, because of the rigor with which the states are now able to compare carrier reports to the winery reports.
Is that it's probably not as common that the ABC is going to actually come out and do an audit of your shipments, but I think anecdotally we are hearing more and more about the sales tax authorities doing audits. All the states around the country are really struggling from a budgetary standpoint, and so they're getting a little tighter on the sales tax collection. So it's not uncommon that you're going to hear from a sales and use tax, like the Department of Revenue, that might be interested in taking a closer look at your records.
Yeah, we don't use that Department of Revenue term as derogatorily, Ann, as you might think, just because that's where you work. There was another question back there, I think. Yeah.
So obviously we've seen some really great sales on the direct consumer, or progress on the direct consumer side of things. So thank you for that. Regarding the retail battle and the whole 1720, do you think progress can be made there, and is that an uphill battle?
Well, I think it's an uphill battle for this reason. The advocates for it haven't gotten in-state champions to work with them. I mean, one of the very first things the Wine Institute did when we started pursuing this was go to all the in-state wine industries and make sure that before we introduced a bill, that the in-state winery folks were both comfortable with the bill, but also supportive of the bill, rather than seeing it as a threat to their business, seeing it as an opportunity for them to be able to also take advantage of direct consumer shipping into other states. And so it was an education process. And we were then able to have the in-state wineries go in and be the ones who oftentimes were the only ones who testified in favor of the bill. I mean, it's not uncommon for us to have passed legislation where my lobbyists talked to everybody, but the person who got up and talked in the hearing were wineries from in that state. There was never a California winery person who necessarily would have stood up and talked in South Dakota this year or something like that. So the retailers have had a harder time in getting the retail folks at the local level to support it. And as long as you have the in-state retailers opposing you, it's going to be hard, I think, for anybody to pass retailer legislation. And to date, all of the national retailer associations, other than the Tom Works folks, the wine direct shipping folks, have come out in opposition to direct consumer shipping. So having the other retailers and the state associations even more actively opposed is the primary reason that we've not been able to prevail in including retailers in the laws. In fact, right now in Massachusetts, the only public opponent to direct consumer shipping is the Massachusetts Package Store Association. The wholesalers have even kind of gone publicly silent on the opposition, but it's the package stores that are the opponents to winery direct shipping and certainly to retailer direct. So I think the retail sector has to still do a better job of getting in-state support for shipping, because as long as you're going up against, you're going to get hometowned when you go to a state legislature. If all the in-state retailers are opposing it and your only advocates are out-of-state retailers, it's not going to get passed. And that's just a practical, political, that's my read on it, I think. And there's still a lot of work to be done there, I think.
Please help me thank Steve Gross and Ann Hutchinson for a great job.
Thank you.